Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 3rd of February now. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at weather.gov/Alaska. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. During the day, you can find more information on your weather all around Alaska on Facebook, on the NWS Alaska Facebook page, and on Twitter using the hashtag AKwx, short for Alaska Weather. Of course, you can continue the conversation with our Twitter account here or any of our local forecast office accounts, whether that's NWS Fairbanks, NWS Anchorage, or NWS Juneau. Again, using AKwx, a good way to let us know you're talking about Alaska weather. On YouTube in the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing there around 4 o'clock or so. You can see all the surface maps you'll see here shortly and about a 2.5-minute version of that, so short and sweet. And of course, following this broadcast here on our broadcast partners YouTube channel. If you go to AKwx TV, you'll be able to find this complete broadcast. Perhaps if you miss a part or you want to go back and check it out one more time or watch it about 10 times during dinner. It's great fun. Here's a look at the hazardous weather as we look all around Alaska, and the Gulf of Alaska continues to be pretty unsettled. A lot of systems coming in here and just kind of parking, and as such we're tightening up the pressure gradient. With that, wind is blowing snow around Thompson Pass, and through about 6 o'clock tomorrow we expect not only a little bit of wind to blow around the snow that's already on the ground, but perhaps a storm total of about 3 to 5 inches around the Thompson Pass region. So if you're coming and going from Glen Allen to Valdez or even further there, watch out for the wind and the poor visibility expected around Thompson Pass at least through the rest of this evening and into early tomorrow morning. Looking northward up around Bettles, wind advisories in effect through tonight and into tomorrow. Gusty winds will be traveling through that region there, and again could create some poor visibility as a result in blustery conditions. So watch yourself there if you're flying around Bettles and the upper Noatak Valley. Here's a look at the satellite picture across the rest of the state, and the pattern is really unchanged for most of the last week and maybe even longer. Low pressures parked in the Gulf. The jet stream is banked pretty hard back to the west, and as a result of that, it's pushing moisture from the Gulf all the way into the Arctic. The result of that is cold air is traveling down into the lower 48. And once again, as we talked about yesterday, that's creating blizzard conditions for some across the central plains. Conditions have eased up there, but the cold is still pouring in. And that's because the warmth is pouring into Alaska. So you can see the weather pattern here. A broad, sweeping south and easterly flow moving through southeastern Alaska. The front moving through the Annette region earlier today. A brief little dusting of snow grains or sleet perhaps popping through there. The clouds still working their way northward, and some stronger winds all along this boundary here. As this comes through, we'll probably see the winds and the waves come up at the surface and likely creating additional turbulence there through some of the passes. Looking out west, the moisture streaming across the southern Bering Sea and still lifting northward up around the Gulf of Anadyr. As that progresses northward, it's chipping away at some of the ice across south and western Alaska. So you'll see wave forecasts once again around areas in the upper Kuskokwim and around Nunivak Island. And the ice is trying to move southward, but again, there's a lot of warm air lifting northward over that, so that may be slowing its progress just somewhat. Temperatures on this day back in 1947 were abysmally cold across a large part of the state and south central, setting new records for many locations in south central. Today, temperatures are warming back up with this broader flow of southerly wind. You'll notice another wave of low pressure working its way into the central Gulf. You'll see that on the surface charts here in just a minute. Today's weather map is riddled with waves of low pressure working from east to west around the northern end of this general circulation here. Only pockets of light precipitation seen today. Some of that around Tok, certainly around southeast. Some snow up around Haines and rain and maybe a little sleet down around Annette as the front moved through. Around the Alaska Peninsula, some pockets of light rainfall there, as well as areas around AKwx, and blowing snow up across the North Slope and snow showers around Kivalina earlier today. Later on tonight, our low pressure system will probably have another part focusing in on the central and eastern Gulf. One piece will split off a little bit to the west, and we'll see another circulation still holding its place in the center of the Gulf of Alaska. Along the coast, pockets of light rainfall, nothing too widespread or heavy at this point, but look for that to gradually increase as more warmth and more moisture is working its way northward. This will be the warmest and wettest side of the storm, as it usually is. Out across southwestern Alaska, some light areas of rain and snow mixed together. Some of that could travel as far west as AKwx and AKwx. As you get a little bit further west than that, it becomes showery and a little bit more mixed in with snow. Areas of blowing snow across the Yukon Valley and especially north into the Noatak and Kobuk valleys there, and areas of light fog, probably expansive across the north slope there with more blowing and drifting of snow, but probably not reaching any severe levels. By Thursday, low pressure is still split into two parts. One of those parts will be sitting right across Kodiak Island at 961 millibars, and a reorganized occluded front will be formed across the eastern and northern Gulf. The pressure gradient should tighten up across the southeast and across the northern Gulf Coast. Because of this, we're going to see some regions of pretty strong and gusty winds. Low-level wind shear may be possible, especially outside of Prince William Sound and the Copper River Basin and into places like Portage Valley and through Shelikof Strait. When you see the marine winds here in a little bit, you'll notice those winds are coming up Thursday and Friday. As we look at southeast, you'll see a similar effect, kind of a channeling of wind coming through the Haida Gwaii region and into southern sections of the interior channels of southeast. So watch for some changes there and some gusty winds. And watch for snow showers to continue south and west of the Pribilofs and maybe into the Pribilofs themselves, with the central and eastern chain. Periods of rain and snow a little bit more likely as you get closer to Dutch Harbor and Nikolsky. For the interior, as moisture is moving northward, eventually we're going to have enough cloud cover and moisture at lower levels to support some snow showers. And it looks like that process starts to take place along the Alcan for Eagle and the upper Yukon as we get into Thursday afternoon. Some of that creeping westward further than the Tanana Valley. As we get into Friday, it becomes a little bit more apparent, and the pressure gradient is still tight. So not only do you have the chance for seeing some light snow, but if it does snow, it could be blowing around enough that visibility could drop off pretty quickly. So watch for that and plan for that. Across the North Slope, you'll notice that very tight pressure gradient, and we do expect some wind there and some areas of blowing and drifting snow, and for Kotzebue Sound as well. Otherwise, light snow for St. Lawrence Island, around the Pribilofs, southwest. Periods of rain and snow may mix there as low pressure pulls even further to the west. That's going to allow more warmer air into the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas and certainly along the west coast in general. Around Prince William Sound, watch for some areas of rain and snow there. Light rainfall continues for southeast as colder air sweeps in. The snow level may start coming down as we head into the weekend. And another wave of low pressure, this one in a slightly different position, just south of AKwx and AKwx at 981 millibars. Better chance for some snow on the western side of that. That's a look at the rest of the week. Let's take a look at temperatures today. For southeast, mid to upper 30s in many cases. The outer coast in the lower to mid 40s. All of this was ahead of that frontal passage earlier today. 35 around Juneau, 29 around Haines today, 39 for Yakutat, 27 in Valdez. But look at Cordova, a mild 42 by comparison, 40 in Seward, 39 in Homer, 31 in Kenai, upper 20s for Anchorage today. Talkeetna hit 32, a little bit up the road in Cantwell, 19 degrees, 1 below in Fairbanks. It was even colder in Eagle today. It's 7 below, 2 above in Northway, 2 below in Fort Yukon, and 7 above in Tanana this afternoon. For Kaktovik, it was 3 below, 8 below around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, 1 below for Barrow. At Kasuk, even colder at 11 below, Wainwright 10 below. Kotzebue Sound temperatures were in the single digits for the most part. Shishmaref made it up to 10 and 23 in Nome, with Unalakleet at 20 degrees. McGrath showed 11, about the same as Galena this afternoon. Bethel was around 15, 16 in Sabuga, 19 for Nunivak Island. In Southwest and Bristol Bay, we saw temps above freezing. Lake Iliamna was not one of those places, though. The Alaska Peninsula in the upper 30s, Sandpoint 39. Falls Pass and Cold Bay just about the same, 36 degrees to about 37. Same for Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Lower 30s for St. Paul and St. George, both going above freezing today. And lower 30s for AKwx and AKwx, and 27 out in Shemya. Now, overnight lows in the interior are warming up. In fact, the plus side of 0. Not above freezing, but above 0 for Fairbanks. You'll notice all the way down the Susitna Valley, temps are in the 20s tonight, including areas into the Anchorage Bowl and southward down Cook Inlet. 30s for Kodiak Island, 37 in Cordova once again. Southeast in the 30s and 40s, with some places like Haines holding on to overnight lows in the upper 20s, closer to 40 degrees for the outer coast of southeast. Mid to upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and the central and western chain will be colder, in fact closer to, if not below zero or below freezing tonight. Southwest in the teens and 20s, Nome 14, Barrow 8 below, looks like Tanana closer to 8 degrees tonight, and Kaktovik closer to 7 below. High temperatures there tomorrow. A little bit warmer, just by a degree or so. 5 below in Barrow, Nome at 19, Southwest in the 20s and 30s into Bristol Bay, closer to 40 degrees. Near 40 degrees as well for the Alaska Peninsula. Look for 33 in St. Paul and about the same for the central and western chain. South Central in the mid to upper 30s, lower 40s in fact as you get out toward Homer, Seward, and Kodiak. 43 in Cordova, 35 in Whittier, and mid to upper 30s for southeast. Some outer coast locations, including Craig and Klawock, could easily make it back into the mid to upper 40s tomorrow afternoon, with the capital city near 34. Flying weather shows IFR conditions expected across the outer coast there for the north slope. Look for that IFR to be extended a little bit further west if the winds really start to pick up. Most of that's going to be due to blowing snow and some low-level moisture there. South of St. Lawrence Island through St. Matthew and the Pribilofs and all the way down to the peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. Expect IFR conditions throughout the daytime tomorrow and along the western Alaska ranges thanks to precipitation and snow, and IFR across the outer coast of southeast through Yakutat and just outside of Prince William Sound and across the eastern coast of Kodiak Island. Otherwise, MVFR mainly along the coastlines of most of the state today, including the islands for tomorrow. Pass conditions show Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass looking pretty good right now. VFR conditions expected for both regions, but Lake Clark and Merrill Pass not so good. IFR conditions expected through most of the day there thanks to snow, and Rainy Pass expected to drop with visibility there throughout the daytime. MVFR to IFR conditions throughout the day. Windy Pass we expect to see VFR flying as we get into the afternoon. Isabel Pass should improve throughout your Thursday with MVFR conditions to start. Mentasta Pass marginal, transitioning to better visibility, higher ceilings there as we get into the afternoon, so some improvement noted there. Probably holding around MVFR through a good chunk of the day for Tanita Pass on Thursday. Portage Pass should also see some improvements starting out though at IFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see IFR flying through most of your Thursday, it looks like at this point. Freezing levels show the surface freezing line is still just north of the Pribilofs and kind of jogging a little bit further westward as that warmer air expands its reach across the southern Bering. Not a whole lot of movement across the southern and Gulf Coast, so it looks like most of it's going to stay in the same place for southeast. And warmer air is making another run northward again, with even warmer air sneaking into the eastern Gulf at 4,000 feet. Another pocket of warmth showing up across the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow morning. Icing potential is still pretty hit and miss, but there are going to be a few hot spots to watch. Some of that across the northern parts of southeast tomorrow above 4,000 feet. Also, as air is rushing over the mountains there, we might start getting a few more of those mountain waves across southwest, so watch for some icing potential there that could reach some occasional moderate and above 5,000 feet for the central and eastern chain. There's some light to isolated moderate across the eastern Aleutians and into the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Right now, most of the interior and north look to be okay. Here's the jet stream, and remember, it pretty much looked like this yesterday, didn't it? A super highway of weather coming in at 150 to 160 knots through the North Pacific, hitting a ridge, jumping northward into southeast, and then crashing back into the lower 48. And high pressure is also working more of that warmth northward, though, and out of Alaska, 75 to 90 knots into the Arctic, and the cold air's got to go somewhere, and it does at 90 knots there. It's blowing further and further south, but generally east of Alaska and through the Yukon, British Columbia, and Northwestern Territories. At 9,000 feet, our circulation is controlled by low pressure across the South and East Bering Sea and Bristol Bay. Southerlies working across the Gulf at 30 to 40 knots, 55 knots over Haida Gwaii, slowing down as it reaches the interior at about 10 to 20 knots. Easterlies moving right along the outer coast and the North Slope, 35 to 40 knots, with northerlies coming down the western Bering. At 3,000 feet, you can see southerlies blowing in the same direction, a little bit stronger though, closer to the low at this level, 50 to 60 knots coming in across the interior and the lower and middle Yukon. 10 to about 35 knots over the Kotzebue Sound region. Slower winds around the Pribilofs, but then they pick up pretty quickly across Adak and Atka at 20 to as high as 40 knots. And look at the winds across the North Slope, 50 knots there. No wonder the wind's going to blow with winds like that at 3,000 feet. Turbulence we expect to see below 6,000 feet, at least some light chop across the North Slope and probably some occasional moderate across the Chukchi Seacoast. We're looking for some light to isolated moderate on the southern side of the Kotzebue Sound region all the way up towards Shishmaref, And chop expected across the Aleutians. Watch for isolated severe across the northern coast of the Gulf below 4,000 feet. And wouldn't be surprised to see occasional moderate extended a little bit more into southwestern Alaska tomorrow. So if you're flying out to King Salmon from Anchorage or making a run through any of the passes, assuming visibility is okay, you're probably going to have some pretty good bumps moving across south and western Alaska. And of course for southeast, with winds coming in much stronger and being channeled into some narrow terrain there, watch for at least occasional moderate and probably a chance for some isolated severe across southern parts of southeast below 5,000 tomorrow. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again talking about the Augmented Reality Sandbox is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this. A quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level, say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments. So
that is really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version. Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney.
And this tool here has a Microsoft Kinect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Kinect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Kinect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox too is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect, Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this Sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in this new forms of technology. Allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks when the first model was being made, the prototype with plywood and such. We had professional adult professor types had heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that, and to see how it reacts in time, and it's a dynamic learning tool. And it responds.
That's exactly the word.
And you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching tool for topography can it have? You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course. And even just understanding weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
Wow.
Would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts. Thanks, Eric and other Dave. Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and notice the Polynya coming off the west coast. Once again, offshore flow pushing the ice away from the coast, and as it does that, it's kind of losing that really high concentration ice area right along the coastline. So this could be opening up a little bit, not entirely, not overall, but a little bit, lowering the concentration there north of Amonix, south of Nome, all the way through Macoriac and Etolan Strait and the upper Kuskokwim Bay. Notice also around St. Matthew Island, just a little bit of low concentration ice out there. You can see the latest on this anytime you want, weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php from our Sea Ice Desk experts right here in Alaska. For Thursday, across southern southeast, look for winds to come up to 45 knots from the south and southeast at around the Dixon entrance, and the ocean entrances up to 13-foot seas there on the outer coast, as much as 23-foot seas. Those southeasterly winds will stay pretty strong from the southeast all the way up toward Yakutat. 45 knots there, 25 knots on the inside of Lynn Canal with a 5-foot sea. As we get into Friday, things slow down a little bit, as they should be for Friday. A southeasterly flow around the Lynn Canal, northeasterlies in Stevens Passage and points southward, northwesterlies through Clarence Strait, and south and southwesterlies along the outer coast at 15 to 25. 16-foot seas are expected in the south and 17-foot seas in the north. Things will be better by Friday. For Thursday, north and easterly winds racing down Cook Inlet, race even more as they get west of the Barren Islands up to 45 knots with an 18-foot sea. Broad easterly flows sweeping across the northern parts of the Gulf up to 50 knots. In fact, storm force outside of Hitchinbrook Entrance and areas along the Prince William Sound region. We'll be looking at easterlies at around 30 with an 8-foot sea. Easterlies also coming into Kodiak Island at 30 knots. Reversing course and coming in from the south and west by Friday with an 18-foot sea. Southeasterlies diminish As we get into the north and western Gulf, 15 knots in Prince William Sound for Friday. Northeasterlies continue down northern Cook Inlet, but the wind speeds are dropping off to about 25 to 30 there, with seas ranging between 8 and about 12 feet on the inside. For southwest, look for an easterly flow in Bristol Bay. Northerlies down the Bering Sea coast at 25. Westerlies south of Sandpoint and King Cove, and 25 knots coming into Chignik and Castle Cape with a 13-foot sea. If you were a weather guy, you'd probably put the low right there. That's about how that works. And so as we get into Friday, you can see low pressures move northward. A southeasterly flow inside of Bristol Bay. Southerlies being drawn into the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula. 35 knots with a 17-foot sea, a little bit more southwesterly heading up toward Kodiak, and southwesterlies on the southern Bering coast of the Alaska Peninsula with a 10-foot sea there. For the Aleutians, low pressures drawing in westerlies across most of the chain, 30 to 40 knots there across the Pacific coast, and 25 to 35 across the Bering Sea coast with 10 to 12-foot seas, 15 out in the west, and 16 to 17 along the Pacific coast for Thursday. Conditions improve a little bit as we get into Friday. Still looking at some higher seas there south of Adak and Atka with westerlies along the Bering Sea coast, and 40-knot winds kick in from the north and west across Kiska and Attu with a 16-foot sea. For the west coast, northeasterlies coming across St. Lawrence Island, still over ice, but we have added back in the sea forecast there for areas north of Nunivak Island up toward Hooper Bay, a 5-foot sea there. Northeasterlies over St. Matthew, northerlies for the Pribilofs, and northeasterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim with a 35-knot wind and a 9-foot sea. For Friday, that diminishes to 15 knots, becoming a little more variable around the Pribilofs and northeasterlies, 20 to 30 across St. Lawrence Island, and areas north of Nunivak Island, 20 knots over St. Matthew. Across the Arctic coast, 30 knots for the Beaufort Sea, north and easterly winds there. The winds pick up a little bit more down the Chukchi Sea coast, 25 to 35, and northeasterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound. Those really pick up on Friday. Watch for stronger winds, turbulence, and probably lower visibility west of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. North and easterlies for the Beaufort Sea coast as well. North of Point Barrow, northeasterly winds at 30 knots as you wrap up the week. Here's a recap of your surface weather. Low pressures in the same old place. It is pulling a little bit further to the west, though, as we get into Thursday and Friday. Watch for a pickup in the rainfall across southeast, and periods of snow showers will gradually work their way northward and into the interior as we get into Thursday and Friday. No major accumulations there, but we do have a wind advisory and a blowing snow advisory for places like Bettles, I should say. Wind advisory there tonight and into tomorrow, and a blowing snow advisory around Thompson Pass if you're planning travel there, on top of some actual falling snow. Storm totals there 3 to 5 inches. Watch for periods of rain and snow showers across the outer coast. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.